Welcome to the Gut Show. I'm Erin Judge, registered dietitian and founder of Gut Debate, and I will be your host. My goal on this side of the internet is to empower those with IBS and digestive disorders to understand their guts better, to have a healthier relationship with their bodies, and make confident choices to improve their digestive health. During this season of the Gut Show, you can expect a weekly conversation covering a hot topic related to health, digestion, and IBS. As a disclaimer, I am a dietitian, but I'm not your personal dietitian. Everything we cover in this episode is meant to be educational and not a substitute for personalized care from your healthcare team. Laurie, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited for this topic because I think of you as a true groundbreaker in the world of GI psychology. And I know GI psychology as a whole is like probably one of the most groundbreaking fields of GI right now. And then you have your own subset within that, which is exciting. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to talk about this. I'm very passionate about this topic, as you know. So,
of course, yeah. And we're going to dive right in. So I know last year, you published an article on or study that looked at IBD and the use of mind-body care with that focus on resilience. And you showed reduced hospitalizations, reduced opioid use, reduced steroid use, which kind of shifted conversations in a lot of these conferences, and just it created a lot of talk. And I know this wasn't something that started just in this study. So I'm curious where your work actually began and kind of what led up to this study and now everything that's come from this work.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I started this journey probably 20 years ago now, believe it or not. And it really kind of started with the patients, right? Listening to the struggles that patients had facing their disease, facing their Crohn's, their colitis, their irritable bowel, their abdominal pain, what have you. I think initially we were sort of taught as psychologists when we were thinking about mind body, we were taught about sort of the physical manifestations of underlying psychological problems, right? So if you worried a lot, you might get a bellyache. We're all familiar with that. But I realized as I was dealing with my practice has only been in gastro patients, right? And I realized that there is such a subset, the majority of patients actually have such strengths and positive characteristics that if I could just bottle those up and give them to somebody at the time of diagnosis, you'd really be able to change people's lives. And so I started asking these questions in my research. Before I did the interventional stuff, I did a lot of research on, what are these strengths? What do patients actually need to have in their mindset that is going to set them up for success? Obviously, I'm a psychologist. I saw people, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress. Those things are very real, very prevalent in the population. But a lot of times it's because we've failed to address those underlying problems that people have, the fear response, the lack of confidence. So over the years, long story, but over the years, we've developed what we call the resilience 5, right? And those are the 5 characteristics. I'm sure there's hundreds, but there's 5 things that I've kind of, scientifically validated as critical to adjusting to a diagnosis of IBD. Acceptance of the disease being one of the first things, not approval, not I'm glad this happened to me, or oh, I found a silver lining, or I'm a better person because I got Crohn's, but more of just this is where I'm at and this is what I'm going to have to deal with and I can't avoid it. 2, optimism and, realistic optimism that things in life are not personal, pervasive and permanent, that there's always opportunities to, find hope. The ability to self-regulate, the ability to calm yourself down when you're stressed, the ability to stay on the phone with the insurance company, even though they're really frustrating you so that you get your prescription. Your social support network, very important. We can talk about that later. And then lastly, your self-confidence and the ability to actually do what's needed of you. What do you need to learn? Swallow pills, follow a diet, do an an injection to explain to your doctor what your symptoms are. So that became our treat to target. Right. And we talked about how everybody kind of has to have those 5 characteristics optimized to the best of their ability. And then if they do, pretty much anything else that comes their way, a surgery, a pregnancy, a change in medication, a change in support structure, is not ideal, but they will be able to handle. And I think that is exactly how we developed the GRIT method, was this idea of the Resilience 5, gaining resilience through transitions in life, of which there are many, especially because most people with IBD are diagnosed in young adulthood. And so you're always going to be building resilience. If we can give you those 5 tools at the beginning, it's a lot easier. And that's what we were able to kind of show in our study as well.
That's so interesting. And I think, we're going to get into how this crosses over, but as someone myself, I've lived with IBS since I was a child, and I get into that a lot through my channels, which has led me to, being a dietitian focused in this space because I've lived it. That empathy is there. I understand how that feels. But with that personal experience, I think it's been really interesting as a practitioner to see people take such different paths, right? Because I work with so many people who, and they start to compare the severity of their symptoms with each other, which we know is not productive. But you see someone who has really severe symptoms that are impacting their daily life, still living their lives fully. And you see someone with the same severe symptoms impacting their daily life who's not. We see people who've been supported, who haven't been. I've seen, it's interesting to see this. And I think it leads to online in social media, podcasts even like this. I know even me sharing my own story sometimes can lead to an unhealthy comparison because we do see these different outcomes, but we don't often talk about what can lead to those outcomes, which is the work you've done. That it's not just grin and bear it, or it's not just, well, you had a better doctor, you didn't, or whatever. It's like there's actually a method to it. And yes, some people might have a leg up on that method than others, but that's just such an interesting piece to, I think, dig out after experiencing that for so long. So in your work, how have you seen that overlap in other conditions, or even thinking about signs of someone who hasn't developed resilience versus those who have been able to, and what that looks like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, one of the reasons that I really like resilience as the broader concept is because it's sort of the opposite of stress. Right. So, stress being anything that requires the body to adapt. Right. And I use the engineering analogy all the time. Bridges are under stress. Bridges have tension, right? They expand and contract. Like that is just a physiological concept. Right. And resilience is also that ability to expand and not take on that stress or crack under the pressure. Right. And so everyone has both stress and resilience. It's all, part of our human body. This is why I got into the GI tract, because there's nothing better than the brain-gut connection to talk about the role of stress and resilience, right? And so I think it really, resilience, everyone has it, everyone's born with it, but it is modified over time. If you just live long enough, you're going to be more resilient. So number one, it's adaptive to always, adapting to your circumstances is always going to, build resilience. The problem is that a lot of these disorders of gut-brain interaction, IBD, for many people, it's the first time that something bad has happened, right? It's the first adversity that you face, not the last. And I think that that's where the resilience building comes in. We could let you just live with your IBS or your IBD for 20 years, and you'd probably be resilient, right? But all the decisions you made along the way might have been made without that experience from others in the community who know, what, don't change where you're going to go to college based on being near to your doctors. You'll find somebody else that you can, see, let's help you. You know what? Let's not homeschool you, even though we'll get you an accommodation to use the bathroom at school, but don't just stay home from school. you need people to teach you those things, because of course your reaction is going to be protect myself, take care of myself, avoid pain and suffering. And we want to be able to say no, just like you would put on a bridge. We have a little extra little string that connects to this part, or we add extra tiles so that if the water gets in it, it doesn't permeate. That's all we're doing. We're just building resilience here because we know what you need to do. We have that hindsight from other patients that have come before you. What can we give to you and translate it? And if we do that, then you don't get depressed. Then you don't develop anxiety and avoidance behavior. And this is what you're talking about, the people that have terrible disease, but perhaps had somebody say to them, you know what, it's going to get better. In the meantime, please don't make a decision on where you're going to go to, work, or who you're going to date because of this. It's going to get better. Versus, you're right, you shouldn't be suffering this much. You should just stay home, avoid stress, avoid life until you feel better. That's all we're really kind of doing.
Yeah, that's incredible. And I think a lot of people probably relate to that, because there's always this joke, right? Of you go in and then you're told to, well, just stress less, or just relax, or just calm down. And it's funny because it's like, well, how does that work, right? It's like living as, a person in the United States looks one way, living, as a mom of kids looks one way. Like, we all have our own stressors, and sometimes those stressors don't go away. And so it's a funny thing to hear whenever you're like, well, how do I actually do that? And I know so many patients feel that way, where they feel like they're missing the actual tools. And, we're given breath work, we're given meditation, we're given these great recommendations, but at the same time, that doesn't always help in the moment when you are having that feeling of, well, everything just stacked against me, or I feel like someone just kind of took the rug out from under me. How do I breathe through that, when it's disappointing and I feel like things are failing, or, that's a really real thing that's challenging for people. And what you're saying is that this is a way to not just ignore or avoid that or take that away, because that experience is still going to happen, that this is a way to learn how to deal with that experience in a more productive, better way, right?
Yeah, and a lot of it is just that self-compassion, right? Being able to show yourself the grace that you need, recognize that you're still going to reach your goals. How you get there may have to change a little bit, and that flexibility and grace to be able to say it's okay. Like, I may do this, because a lot of patients will say to me, I guess I just am not that resilient. I struggle with depression or anxiety. I'm just not resilient. And, I really try to build that concept. Everyone's resilient. You're here. You're clearly adapting. It's just, what can we do to make you not only adapt but thrive? And that really needs to be the conversation.
Absolutely. And that's going to bring up my next point. So I think there are going to be some people listening who may think, oh, well, I'm obviously not doing that well. And I think as people with chronic illness, whether it be our IBS community, I know they feel this a lot, but also IBD, right? You've done everything for remission and you're still not hitting the targets your doctors want you to. IBS, you're following all the rules that have been given to you and you're still having flares. Like, we tend to put a lot of blame and shame on ourselves and give ourselves these really unrealistic targets. And it can be easy to hear this and say, well, then I should be perfectly dealing with this. I should be doing everything I want in my life. And that may not be realistic. So where's the line between realism and being realistic about outcomes and expectations, and resilience as well?
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah. I mean, I think it is this, it's a mindset, right? It's not an outcome. So I think it's sort of this idea of, we're always working towards this. You never know what life's going to throw at you. Chronic illness aside, anything can happen. And we saw this during the pandemic, where actually a lot of people living with chronic conditions were like, I got this. This is like not so difficult. I'm the queen of cancel plans. I'm happy to stay home. I know how to leverage my social support network. I got it, right? It was almost sort of like a validation of life with, restrictions. But it really is, kind of thinking about that growth mindset and always working to improve yourself and giving yourself that compassion and grace to recognize that what you might have done before that worked may not work now. And that's okay to change course. It doesn't mean you failed before. It just means that something has changed in the context in your life, or you prioritize or value something differently now than you did then. And you only have so many resources, particularly if you have to spend a quarter of your resources on managing your health that most people that are under 50 don't have to do. Where are you going to spend that other 75%? And how, you have to be a little more careful than somebody who doesn't to do that.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So how does this work then? Because this is all incredible, right? It's like, it makes sense. You can see these skills develop, like you mentioned, without actual guidance in that area. You probably can also see it if you've had good mentors in your life, great friends in your life, parents or leaders, guiders, whoever, kind of giving you these tools along the way. But what does this look like in a clinical setting? Like, how do you actually implement the work?
So we have an assessment process where we're really trying to identify people who are struggling before they are, being diagnosed with a mental health disorder, and reaching out at that point to sort of, fine tune, where are they strong? How do we get those strengths applied to your chronic condition, and where are you lacking, or what do we need to kind of optimize? So for a lot of people, they are optimistic, they have accepted their diagnosis, but they're isolated and they have low social support. And so we're like, okay, like, let's work on that network, because, that's something that might be really important for you to be able to buffer yourself against stress. Other people might be like, I'm really not accepting that this abdominal pain is not something more serious going on, right? How do I know that? I'm not accepting that. I'm going to keep searching for a cure, right? And being able to say, okay, like, that's fair. And obviously things change in medicine, but right now, what is this keeping you from doing? And can we use another skill set like your social high support network to still be able to go out and act, in life with pain? So it's really around applying that personalized approach. And, obviously we're able to do that in our basic interviews with the patients. Part two is the team-based approach. So, we're talking a lot about the psychological, but we actually do nutrition. We have a clinical pharmacist, we have social workers, we have the kind of the whole team. And the idea is that rather than just saying to a patient, you need all these things, right? Like, you're just diagnosed with Crohn's or just diagnosed with IBS, you need, 25 different things to sign up for. We say, let's figure out what makes sense for second and third. We don't want to overwhelm people. So we may say, you know what, your diet quality is really affecting your mood right now, right? You're not eating enough. You don't have enough energy. You're not getting enough protein. You're low on, vitamin B. Let's stabilize that. Then we'll start talking about your mental health. But I have a feeling that your mood could be improved just by what you're eating, as opposed to, let's focus on your mood because your dietitian would like you to change your diet, but you're too depressed to get up in the morning and make breakfast. So maybe we should focus on that part first. So that's the second component here, which is that prioritization of where to start, because people are otherwise, they're so overwhelmed and they feel like they're putting an effort towards, you should get better sleep, you should get better stress management, you should eat a better diet. Have you tried acupuncture? Too much. That's not helping us. So that's part two. And then part three is within that care plan, within that prioritized program, you start meeting with the expert in that field. So if diet's first, then you start working with the dietitian and she'll do evidence-based diet. You work with the social worker or the psychologist, you're going to get an evidence-based cognitive behavior therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, gut-directed hypnotherapy. You'll get what you need, but I think the difference in our program, instead of just referring to psych or referring to nutrition, is that we're actually a little more intentional about the order in which that happens.
Yeah, that's important. I think that is right. That is the future of GI healthcare, right? Is not just a multidisciplinary team, meaning every person has everyone at all times, but finding ways to look at that person as a whole being and figure out, okay, where are we at, and like how can we make progress, efficiently and effectively in line with what the patient needs and also what they want, right?
Yes.
If they want it, they'll follow through with it. And that's really powerful and missing. And I think for patients listening, the sad side is that not everyone has that type of care team or even a leader in their care team that is thinking about that. But I think even as a patient myself, like we're able, if you really take time to think about what you need, like that's where you get to be your best advocate, is to say, hey, like this is something I'm noticing. Like, what do you think, as my care provider about going this route or making sure we focus on this, or, just really being kind of an advocate for bringing that together is really important until you're able to get a team that is thinking about that for you.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's really easy this is why optimism ends up being one of our resilience 5, because I think it's very easy to just feel hopeless and helpless, that you don't have any agency over this, or that you're afraid to bring things up because of being told that something's in your head or that it's your fault. And so you don't say anything. But, I think that optimism, that sort of, that's not such a permanent characteristic. You're not either glass half full or half empty. You're somebody who can say, I'm going to choose to attribute the situation to something that I have control over, right? And I may feel helpless, but I'm going to choose to believe that I just haven't found the right doctor for myself. I haven't found the right social support system for myself, the right treatment, the right exercise, whatever. I'm going to take it upon myself to say, I just haven't found it yet, not that it's not available to me. And that's where that advocacy, as hard as it is, and frankly, shouldn't have to be so hard. In our healthcare system, we put a lot on patients, but I do think that, having that optimism, it makes it a little easier to move forward.
Oh, absolutely. And I always like to say, this is something I've lived by, is like, you're the only one that lives your life, right? So it's not always fair that maybe you didn't get the greatest doctor at the start, or that you didn't have the parents that listened to you, or you didn't have the supportive friends, or, I think it's sometimes easy to think about what's not there, but at the end of the day, you're the only one living your life. So you do have to take responsibility for that. And it's so hard to do, which I think is where that validation and self-compassion comes in. But at the same time, like, it's worth it because it is your life, and there's no other option really, right? It's either you succumb to that and let your life just kind of pass by you, or, you take control of that, which is rooted in that optimism that, yes, you deserve better. Yes, you can have better. It will happen. You just may have to work harder than someone else, which I guess is acceptance.
Acceptance, exactly right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, I know someone's going to be listening to this and think, well, this sounds wonderful, and I wish I had a GI psychologist that I could call and work with, right? But that's not always possible. And so now we have what's called Trellis Health, right? That has hit the market. So tell us a little bit about Trellis and how that is starting to maybe fill that gap, or what that looks like for patients in relation to resilience therapy.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for asking. I love to talk about that. So Trellus Health, we're about 3 years old now, company. We are a spinoff of Mount Sinai. My co-founder, Dr. Marla Dubinsky, who's a gastroenterologist in the IBD space, and I were able to kind of license that methodology that I was telling you about, that gaining resilience through transitions method, to Trellis Health, to basically be able to commercialize, digitize it, democratize access to the care you would normally get at Mount Sinai. You can now get wherever you are with whatever doctor you're working with. It's a combination approach. So it's not just an app. It's not just a digital therapeutic that, there are those out there as well, which I'm happy to talk about. But we are a combination combination of that assessment. So we use that proprietary assessment I was just telling you about. So we're able to spit out a playbook for somebody based on their strengths, based on what areas they need help in, and what in the order in which they need them. You're assigned a coach, and your coach delivers that, assigns you activities and exercises. But then there's a whole digital curriculum library of content, exercises, self-regulatory strategies, relaxation training, cognitive examples, recipes, whatever you have that you can access on your own time in between. And the idea is really that, obviously we can't put a gastropsychologist in everybody's life, but, there's a lot of things that we as gastropsychologists do with every single patient we see that we are able to I take it from what I would say to a patient in a room, and we make it into something that's engaging and digital without me being there. And that's how we're able to scale and democratize access. So right now we have a couple of different, we're seeing people with Crohn's and colitis. So there's a curriculum focused on that. And then we also recently just opened up to irritable bowel syndrome. So again, pain plus altered bowel habits is our focus, the actual formal IBS diagnosis. And, but a lot of there's so much overlap between Crohn's and colitis and symptoms. So bowel urgency, what do you do if you're in the, grocery store and you need to go to the bathroom? Do you leave your cart and run home? Do you find a bathroom in the stall, in the shop? We've covered all of those really common things. And then your coach is able to kind of help you fill in the gaps around the unique circumstances. So it's high touch, but also leverages technology.
That's incredible. And I'll link all of that in the show notes if anyone's interested in learning more or possibly signing up, thinking about, who is this for, right? It's like, we've talked a lot about what resilience looks like. So that would be one, right? You have a diagnosis and you notice maybe there's not a lot of resilience in your life, or that's not something you've ever even opened the door for conversation of yet. And you're interested in developing that. But I know one question that's going to come up is like, okay, well, there's gut-directed hypnotherapy, there's cognitive behavioral therapy. Now there's this, which direction do I go? And what if I've tried one, right, and it didn't work as well for me? Where do I go instead? Like, can you answer that question?
That's a great question. Yeah. So, I think there's a couple of things. So cognitive behavior therapy and gut-directed hypnotherapy, as you know, are what we call brain-gut behavior therapies. They have a lot of evidence, particularly in the IBS space, for improving gastrointestinal symptoms and gastrointestinal quality of life, right? So that's the beauty of them, is that they are actually targeting the things that we know drive IBS symptoms for many patients. And pain in particular is a target of both CBT and gut-directed hypnotherapy. I will say those are therapies though, right? And those imply that there's a therapeutic relationship. Brain-gut behavior therapies, cognitive behavior therapy, gut-directed hypnotherapy are delivered in the context of a therapeutic relationship with somebody who has assessed you, put you into a pile of, this is what you need. Again, you're working with a licensed professional like Trellis Health, right? Wanting to scale access to this because access is 100% a problem. There are some apps out there now that are based on those clinical trials that we've proven are very effective interventions. But what they are lacking a therapeutic relationship. Right. And so they are proscribed. They're not necessarily personalized or customized. So you're working your way through a program that we think is pretty effective. But if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't mean that you failed that treatment, right? It means that the dose wasn't right, that the therapeutic alliance needed to be there in your case because you have something specific that's a little different than, the masses, right? These are inflexible interventions. And many times it's certainly by the time you get to the need for these, you need something a little more flexible. So I really do encourage people to, use these apps, use these tools as sort of an entree into whether they might be something you're interested in or, can try on your own first. but also recognize that that's very different from what you could get working with an actual licensed professional.
Amazing. And so Trellis kind of fits in with one, helping you determine that, but also it's another set of skills to add on. So if something hasn't worked, you're finding that maybe your condition is kind of taking over your life, like maybe there's a skill set that could be stronger, or maybe even looking outside of your condition. This is what I see again as another professional. I'm always thinking, how would I refer certain things to my patients? And this seems like a really good fit for someone who maybe we can look at other areas of their life where they're lacking resilience, to kind of take that veil of the IBS, the IBD away for a moment and see, okay, are there signs that maybe these skills are weakened because of other experiences? And that could be a sign that, oh, this could be really helpful, not just for their IBD, IBS, but also maybe for the other parts of their life.
For living life, right? I mean, I think fatigue is a perfect example of that, right? Fatigue is a very common extraintestinal manifestation of both IBS and IBD. And there's very little out there for how do you manage fatigue? How do you allocate your resources? How do you reduce the number of decisions you have to make each day to free up brain space to be able to function and thrive, right? And that's something that's not always talked about in the context of, do you have abdominal pain and altered bowel habits? Do you have bloody diarrhea? But it's still something that's going to make or break how you function in life. Fatigue, sleep disturbances. There's a lot of other symptoms and problems that go along with the GI tract that aren't always targeted by more traditional interventions.
That's so true. So I know we're at our time. So one last thing, someone's listening, they're feeling like they're kind of under the weight of everything, right? So they have that whole weight of their condition, how it's impacted their life. They're feeling a little bit swamped by that. Maybe they're going to take these next steps. What's one thing, like either something you can say to them, an encouragement, a mantra they can use, a tool they can use, something that they can take away just today?
I love the phrase, just to give yourself grace, right? Give yourself the grace to do what you need to do for yourself. And try not to let others' views and opinions and beliefs interfere with you living your best life.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Laurie. This is an incredible conversation. Thank you for your work in this area and making this accessible to people and pushing that forward. I know so many living with this are going to be thankful, because it does really change the game of what healthcare looks like. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Erin.
Do you want to keep learning from me in bite-sized pieces, as well as even be able to ask me questions and get those answered? If that is true, then you should follow me on social media so that you can learn from myself, but also my incredible team. You can find us on Instagram at erinjudge.rd or at Getivate. You can also find us at TikTok, same name. And then you can also find us, if you're not already on YouTube for longer and shorter videos than the one that you listened to today. And if you're someone who really does enjoy compiled information from different brands we trust and different recipes that we enjoy, then you can also follow us on Pinterest, where you can see our own boards, but also the boards that we have been able to compile other great IBS friendly links and resources for you.